I would say. For those who were there last week, you will know that we had some technical issues last week, and just a second ago we thought we might have again. But here we are, and today we're going to discuss museums and race as we planned for, and the question we asked last week maybe even more of actuality than it was. For those who have watched the Oscars, they understand what that what that means. We would say, why in our field do we have to think about museums and race? We think we probably do the right thing for a long time. It's probably one of the fields where we have less to suffer from kind of differences and between people, and obviously that is not the case, because a number of our professionals have gathered not so long ago in a meeting in Chicago and addressed a strong message to the field saying, well, we have not made a lot of progress. And to discuss that, we have Joanne Rizzi with us, and she was there last week. She is in the Science Museum in Minnesota and was at the meeting in Chicago as well, and that's the reason why we will have that conversation with her. Joanne, thank you for coming back this week and addressing this topic with us. But before we start, maybe just remind us how you ended up being at the museum in Minnesota, and what you have been doing before, and how you were then involved in the race exhibit. And let's start with that.
Okay, great. I'm happy to be here, and I will not be like Chris Rock at the Oscars, so I hope I will not be disappointing people. I'm not that funny. And I hope we don't have technical difficulties again this week. So I'm Joanne Rizzi, and I've been here at the Science Museum of Minnesota for about 11 years. I started out as kind of exhibit developer and program developer, and now I'm the director of community engagement. And was one of the exhibit developers on the race exhibition. But before that, I was at the Children's Museum in Boston, and I was there for almost 20 years, and doing work really on the same kind of subject matter, but for younger visitors, focused on issues of cultural diversity and multiculturalism, as we called it then. And so really work about around the intersection of kind of race and identity and community. And I've continued to do that work here with the race exhibition.
Yes, and so they were starting to think about that in Minnesota before you arrived, I understand. So you joined the team, but you're probably very well aware of what their intentions were at the beginning. So can you tell us a little bit, why would people do an exhibition on race?
So the catalyst really for doing the exhibition on the race exhibition that has traveled all over the country really came from the American Anthropological Association. They, in the year 2000, they came up with a statement about race, in some ways really to kind of, they wanted to clear and to acknowledge some of the negative impact that anthropology as a field had on the perpetuation of the idea of race, and they wanted to make the statement that race was not biologically based. And I think, you know, in a casual conversation, in the way that things sometimes happen like this, Yolanda Moses, who was the president at the time, who's a cultural anthropologist, said, why don't we do a public education project, and it should be an exhibit and a website and a curriculum. And they put some seed money from the Ford Foundation into developing a plan and to a kind of description of what that would look like. And the Science Museum of Minnesota became aware of that and was very interested in being the museum to work with AAA to do that, to do the exhibition part of the project. And after a number of years and AAA talking, and when I say AAA, I mean the American Anthropological Association, not the car company, they selected the Science Museum. We together wrote an NSF proposal that ultimately was funded the project moving forward. And that was, I think they heard about the NSF project in about 2004, and I joined the museum in February of 2005. And they had some by then they had some ideas about what the themes of the exhibition would be, we very quickly, soon after those themes of kind of biology, history, and what we call contemporary lived experience were the themes that we decided would be the themes of the exhibition.
And so it was a public education program, you say?
Correct.
So how did they think the exhibition could contribute to that?
I think they thought they had this idea that it would be a very large project. I mean, we worked with a group of scholarly advisors, all anthropologists from a range of disciplines, and they were all academic people, not exhibit developers. So there was a lot of discussion about how many words and how much, just kind of what the interactions would be. But they had this idea of a traveling exhibition, and traveling meant that it would go all over the country and that it would be seen by lots and lots and lots of people.
And so as you said, what would be the central idea that they were trying to fight? What did they try to educate the public about? What were the right ideas that they tried to convey?
They wanted to the thing that they wanted to convey to the public, that there is no biological basis for race and that we all share this common ancestry. In other words, we're much more alike than we are different, even though we have these phenotypic differences, so skin color and facial features and that kind of thing, that biologically we're more alike than we're different.
Exactly, right. So, but what we discussed is, it was clear that it started as a public education program, but then in a museum, taking that on was impacted itself by doing this. And I was wondering if you could explain us a little bit how the staff of the museum, going through that process of creating an exhibition like that, reflected on its own vision about race, and race in society, and maybe race in museums.
So yes, I can. And one of the motivations, I think, for the Science Museum of Minnesota in doing the exhibition in the first place was that there was a real interest in both providing a resource for the community in St. Paul and Minneapolis, but also the community in museum field, having this exhibition be a catalyst for dialogue, and having this exhibition be something that people could use for all as the basis for community engagement wherever it was. So the science, when we started the development in 2000, and well, it was before I came, I would say 2003, 2004. The museum and the Twin Cities, this is a pretty homogeneous place. I would say and certainly the perception of Minnesota is that it's very white. It's changing, just like other places in the country are changing, and there was a real desire to have conversations internally about race, as well as offer opportunities for the public. There were a lot of community-based organizations in the Twin Cities who were doing anti-racism work, but to have this big public institution where we could have a high profile and be a place where they could sort of do their work was also very exciting to us.
Right, and so it's been traveling for a number of years now. It's back in Minnesota, it's going to stay there for a while. So yes. Do you have any kind of idea of the impact that it has had, and how compared to what the original idea was? Did you do any evaluation at this point?
Randy Korn did the summative evaluation of the exhibition, and we haven't. We have not evaluated the program, so the community engagement pieces of it. We know anecdotally that it's been to 51 museums throughout the United States. There are two 5,000 square feet versions of each other, and then there's a smaller 1,300 square foot one that we created for small museums and university museums because there was the demand. And that one is now owned and is permanently at the San Diego Museum of Man. But what we know from other staff is that every place really used the exhibition. They made it their own. It's really interesting. When we talk to people, they say, "Well, when we had the race exhibit, I mean, it is as if it was theirs." And every place has done amazing and really, really very different and varied work to connect with the communities where the museums are. So the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, they were really interested in connecting with their community, and they did programming all throughout the city with all kinds of community-based organizations. When it was in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, brought it to there, and they did a lot of work around the biology. They involved the medical community because that's the dominant, and they were really interested in talking about race and medicine and biology. When it was at the Pequot Tribal Museum in Connecticut, Mashantucket, Connecticut, they did a lot of work around the kinds of issues that Native communities have to deal with around race, blood quantum, those kinds of things. The Seattle, the Pacific Science Center connected with a larger racial equity group, police officers, all kinds of law enforcement. There was a black men's group that convened around the exhibition. So the kind of work really varied.
Yeah. And it created sort of a movement in which science centers became the center of a platform that allowed that community work, I understand.
I hope so. I mean, a movement is a very big concept and a grand idea.
Yeah.
And, I mean, certainly a critical mass of people because of the number, the number of years that the exhibition was traveling, there was this opportunity for people to do this work.
Yeah. And this is, well, altogether only one example of how the museum community addresses racial issues in general. And if I hear my field, most of us would say we do a lot of efforts to include diverse communities in our museums and address them in the right way. And we say that for a long time, but obviously we do not seem to have the impact that we want to have. And this is the technique, the difficult moment, but that's where the communication collapsed last time when I was citing Michelle Obama when she was last year at the Whitney Museum. And when she said there are so many kids in this country who look at places like museums and all the cultural centers and they think to themselves, well, that's not a place for me. For someone who looks like me, for someone who comes from my neighborhood, in fact, and I guarantee you that right now there are kids living less than a mile from here who would never in a million years dream that they would become welcome in that museum. And then she said in Chicago when she was young, that was exactly the way she was thinking. And I think that one of the major things we seem to notice is that despite all these 30 years efforts, a lot of people still think that museums are not for them. So why is that?
Well, I think Michelle Obama was talking about, young kids of color and people from communities of color not seeing themselves reflected in the content, not being able to connect to the content, not feeling comfortable for a whole variety of reasons. Not feeling welcome. There are lots of, often I've heard museums cite economic reasons as the barrier, but I think that's not the only reason that communities of color don't come. There are people from those communities who have the money to come and make choices to spend their money other places. But I think it has much more to do with not feeling welcome and not feeling like the content of our museums are relevant to, and they're not seeing their experience reflected. And so I think we, this conversation about museums and, it used to be called multiculturalism and diversity and inclusion, and, I think that there are a lot of people who are talking about that, and it's increasing more and more as the demographics of the country increase more and more. And it's fantastic that Michelle Obama made those comments, and I think there are a lot of people who have been doing this work and thinking about this for decades, and it's very hard to move that and to make those changes, to move that dial.
Well, two remarks on that. The first is when she said that, and people would say, oh, she's using the race card. Really, so as soon as you say something like that, people, accuse you of taking a sort of a stand, making a stand here on. And so I don't know if that's true. I wouldn't say something like that. But so that's one aspect of it. So is it doing racism in the reverse way, so to say, by using that card? Or is it a reality, because what you said is actually it's true that is the situation where we are in, and so we are doing this for so many years. What would you say are the typical things that we do over the last year to address the issue? And
just to respond to that, I think she's calling attention to something that needed to, and she's calling attention in a way that was very public because she is who she is. She's the first lady, and she's and it was picked up, and there were a lot of people who were talking about it, and I thought it was fantastic. This is what a lot of people have been talking about for a long time within the field.
Yeah.
And she just, brought it to a more public dialogue in a way, because internally in museums, that conversation has been taking place. So I don't know if I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
I think.
So if I would further comment on that, actually, is that I don't disagree with her, and I've had that experience in my time, not only in the US, but in other places in the world where it's exactly the same thing. We do these efforts for a long time, and we feel that people that we want to come actually still do not think that they are welcome in the places. And then I want to make another citation, and this comes from a science education magazine, a scientific publication, and it's the result of the work from Emily Dawson in King's College in London, where she has studied these things, how, especially in terms of science museums, right? That may be a particular angle, but she says, and I'm going to take just two sentences out of her executive summary, where she says, we have used a theoretical framework, and our framework suggests that informal science education practices were grounded or are grounded in expectations about visitors' scientific knowledge, language skills, and finances in ways that were problematic for participants and excluded them from science learning opportunities. But not only that, that's what we just said. In fact, what she says is it is argued that informal science education practices reinforced participants' pre-existing sense that museums and science centers were not for us. So it's not only saying they don't feel welcomed, but when they are confronted with the programs and when they actually say, yes, now we did the effort to come, but yes, it's really true, it's not for us. And there is we create more barriers than there were.
Right. I mean, and we've been, we have a project here where it's a NSF-funded project, and it's focused around making and this concept of making. And a lot of museums are maker fairs and maker spaces, and this idea of repurposing materials and being creative with kind of non-traditional materials and technology. And we had our own maker fair, and I think what we noticed and observed that Many of the people who came, we had a lot of people who came, that there were not. We said to each other, well, where are the brown makers? There, we know that within communities of color, people are creative, people make things, people are involved in, but they may not identify with this terminology of maker. And in fact, Leah Buckley did this wonderful analysis of Make magazine and looked at every cover, and not only were there not women, but there were not people of color represented on any of the Make magazines. And so we submitted a proposal where we were wanting to work with communities of color. It was a research proposal. It is a research proposal. It's still going on to look at this concept of making in communities of color. And we have a lot of programs here where we involve people from communities of color, and they are research scientists or engineers. They may be makers too, but they may not identify with that terminology. So we've been doing listening sessions with families from these communities, and it's all around making. And we've invited people to co-create activities with us that we use on the floor. And we call those play, tinker, make. We use activities, and some of these activities come out of communities. We've been doing listening sessions with families, and we've heard things like people don't know what goes on in this building. It's a lot of what I said. Things aren't relevant. It's what Emily Dawson is saying.
Yeah.
So we've been, and again, the research we haven't produced the research yet. We're still in process, but we will share this and share what we've learned, and in turn shift some of what we do so that we can be more welcoming, and so that we can try to think about, once people come here, what is their experience. And that leads to a kind of another topic about this, which is that thinking about the museum culture and who works at museums, and who's developing the activities, and who's developing the content and the curriculum, and who's at the front desk when people come. All these things contribute to a person's experience.
And that makes me think to what I just saw from Neil deGrasse Tyson again, that I saw again this week, and I saw it years ago. It's a lot of. It was in a debate about genetics and genetic differences and things like that, and people brought race up, and he said, before speaking about that, I have to share my experience. And I says, I was 9 years old when I expressed the interest to become an astronomer, and I worked very hard to become that. But when I was speaking to people around me, they would say, what? You want to become an astronomer? Why won't you not become a basketball player? Because that's the way that you are facing when you are a young boy of color, and you express the will to become a scientist. They don't believe you that is the real future for you. And then he says, and when I look back behind, where are the others? I'm the only one. So there has been something going on that makes people stop from doing that. So that's exactly the same thing.
Yeah. That's right. Somebody just sent that around. I think it's been kind of floating around because I just saw it again too, and it's a good reminder. I mean, it's actually a very good reminder, because I think people then people have this sense, well, look, I mean, here's a black man who's the president of the United States. Here's a black man who's a astrophysicist. Here's a black woman who's Secretary of State. I mean, but these are individuals. These are exceptions. It's not the norm. And I think as museums, we can change the norm. I mean, the idea is to change the norm and to change the perception. If we have young girls of color coming to the museum for a program, and they're interacting with a woman scientist of color, that might change what they believe that they could be. It might change. It's a possibility. It's and we're trying to do that here, and I think other museums are trying to do that as well. I think it's hard. This is something that culturally within our institutions is going to, it's a big commitment, and it means that our organizations are going to have to change. And I think that that's scary to people, because it means that the people who are working in these positions may not be the same people who are working. We have to change that. And I think that people are threatened by that.
And is that a little bit of the origin of what happened in Chicago a couple of weeks ago? Because a year ago when we had the AM meeting, there was a number of people who came together after the events in Ferguson, and they basically came together because they thought that the museums were not present enough on the field of society, what's going on in society. They thought that museums should have a more direct impact on the thinking of people about this, and so they were unhappy about that. So that's one of the origins. Get maybe some comment on that?
Sure. So that the convening that happened in Chicago, which was called Museums and Race 2016, I believe, at Transformation and Justice, and this was came as a result of a session that the museum group hosted, called Museums, and Gretchen Jennings, I think, was the kind of catalyst for this, and
yes.
Called Museums Respond to Ferguson. And there were a number of people who came to that session and then lingered afterwards and decided that this was something that they wanted to keep the conversation going. And there were some museums. I know that the Missouri Historical Society was, which was just 6 miles or something away from where Michael Brown was shot, did a lot of programming and worked with the community in developing a lot of programming. They also had the race exhibition, not at the same time. So this group of people and the museum group sort of decided and took it upon themselves to say, this is something that we want to support. This is something that we feel is important, and decided to, with people who had been at that conversation, Museums Respond to Ferguson, they wanted to convene a group of people to talk about what's the future of museums, and how can museums respond to these issues of race and oppression and
being more present in the public sphere, actually.
Be more present in the public sphere, but also internally. I think look within museums, because it's what I was saying earlier about changing the culture of museums. That it isn't just about the programming that we deliver. It's connected to the people who are developing the programming, and the people who are conceptualizing the programming, and the people who are developing the curriculum. It isn't just floor staff and who's at the door. It is that too, but it goes deeper than that. And so this meeting in this convening in Chicago, which was about 24 people, people from all over the country, people who are students who are studying critical race theory, people who are blogging, some people who have been doing this and are for a number of years, like myself, and then people from the museum group who were very interested in thinking about change and shifting museums, and thinking about how we might do this in a way that brought on more people. And so the plan. So that was the meeting in Chicago, and it was two and a half days of pretty intense discussions.
And if you allow me, so because I've seen what on the website has been published and what the topic was, and so what has struck me here was the intention to create a new paradigm from how museums address their responsibility for inclusive staffing, collections, and interpretation. And this new paradigm will examine a vocabulary and a set of theories not usually found in current museum discourse. And they formulated actually three words that I'd like you to comment on. And the first is oppression, and the second is privilege, and the third is intersectionality. Can you address that and see how that is a new language and a new vocabulary that they try to bring into the discussion?
Well, I think it's a new language. It's not new language in some ways, and it's not new vocabulary. It is in thinking about museum programming, it might be new, and to think about this, think about it as a framework for how museums think about their social responsibility. So in that way, it might be new. So I think and who knows if we're actually going to be successful in doing this. I think that's the big question. I think having a group of people who represent a lot of different kinds of museums, who represent a range of thinking about this topic, who represent a range of ethnicities, I think, and age, and so I think that's what's new. I mean, oppression and privilege. If you think about whiteness and think about white privilege, I mean, museums are traditionally, many museums are, white elitist institutions, and so to change that and to think about and have people think about white privilege, which isn't new for some people, but it might be new, and this idea that just by the very nature of your skin color, you have certain advantages, and those advantages play out just as they play out in society, they play out in museums. And this idea about intersectionality and thinking about how race intersects with gender, and how it intersects with social justice, and how it intersects with class. These are all systems that are in play in museums. So I think the context that we're thinking about this language is very different than it's been used in the past.
Yeah, and one of the comments on the blog of the website says that there is an urgent need for white museum professionals to address their privilege and role in oppressive systems. So, and I must say, if I don't disagree with that, it's the first time that I hear it saying that in that way.
Yes, and I think that the idea that's one of the things that came out of this convening is that we're hoping that people will, white people working in museums will think about how they might shift this conversation, that they might shift it, because I think it can't just be the burden of this, of making change cannot just be on people of color. It has to be, and I don't know that we could make a change, that let's use that privilege in a way to change the structure. Use that privilege as a way to shift things, and so that's a lot of what we talked about at the conference. So let me talk a little bit about some of the things, and I urge people to go to the website. You must have the address there, Walter, but
it's museumsandrace2016.org.
And so we're thinking about, and we've been working with AAM on having what we call an unconference, and this will happen on the, we'll have a space that's designated to us, and we will be having, so this will be available for people who have registered for the conference and people who maybe are not registered. And we're planning, and we're in the planning stages at the moment. In fact, there's a conference call happening right now, and we've been meeting over the phone and via internet about how we'll address this and how we'll share what we experienced in Chicago and kind of move things forward and get other people involved, and that will happen at the unconference.
Okay. So if you had to make a summary of what you think the next steps are in this regard, what would you say?
Wow, that's a big, that's a challenge. I guess, well, I think it's hard to make a summary. I think the next steps are, well, come to the unconference, and who knows how many people will come. Maybe it would be really interesting to see if we have, if we end up at capacity, and we have more people who are interested in what we're doing at our session at the unconference than what people are doing at the conference. So that would be a very positive outcome. But the summary is really to involve the museum convening was a small group of people, 24 people, 25 people, so the summary in some ways was a meeting where a group of people who were very passionate about these issues came together to find ways to both to think about what's been done, think about how to involve others, and to identify ways that all people working in the field understand the urgency of this work.
And maybe this is a weird question then, but we're speaking about the museum field at large. We here at ASTC, we are focusing on science museums.
Correct.
According to you, is there a difference between working in a science museum and the way you address this? And we're coming back to the beginning of our conversation because there is biology somehow that tells us that we are not so different from each other. So would it be a different message in science museums than in other museums? Or not?
Probably. I mean, although I don't know, the race exhibit has those three themes of biology, history, and lived experience, which I think that's one of the reasons that the exhibition has been so powerful for people, is because they've been able to see those themes in a context and all connected. So I don't know, a children's museum might look at it different. They might focus more on cultural identity and having kids understand their own cultural identity and how these things fit together. I mean, we've seen this in some ways. The Natural History Museum, might look at this in other ways. An art museum might look at its collections. I think every museum, there are some models. I know that when the Smithsonian Institution hosted the race exhibition, they used the exhibit to what they called, kind of have for all of the Smithsonians to have this shared platform. Each museum created programming that was very specific to their museum, but with this frame of race. So I think it has to work. People aren't going to change their collections. They're not going to change. We have what we have, and it's a broad enough topic that I think it could work for every kind of museum.
So thank you, Joanne, for this conversation. And that's the time that we usually take for a conversation like that. We are over half an hour. It's a very important one and very close to that conversation, and I like to see it move forward. So I'm hoping that some of people that listen to us now and in the future will get inspired and take some more initiatives to help address the topic. And I wish you all the best with your conference in the future. And I remind the website is called museumsandrace2016.org. So if you are interested in finding what the ongoing conversation is, please go there and have a look. Thank you.
Thanks, Walter.
Thank you.